Welcome to the Anxiety Connection. If you've ever struggled with anxiety and are ready to finally get some answers, you've come to the right place. Hi, my name is Wendy Leeds, and I've suffered with anxiety my entire life. Thankfully, I'm also a psychotherapist, and over the years, I've learned a lot about anxiety, where it comes from, and how to manage it. That's what this podcast is all about. So, let's grab a cup of tea and talk about it. I am so glad you're joining us today here at the Anxiety Connection. In this podcast, I want to share something really personal with you. As you may or not know, I've written a book called Calm and Sense, A Woman's Guide to Anxiety-Free Living. It's coming out this spring. And if you're an anxious woman like me, this is the book you've been waiting for. Actually, this is the book we've been waiting for. This is the book I have always dreamed of having, and it's almost here. I am so excited. If, like me, you're interested in having everything you need to know about women and anxiety, how it's different, how to make yourself feel better right away, and if you're interested in having all of that information in one place, this is your book, your companion, your friend. Actually, this is our book. But getting to write this book has not been an easy road. And today, I want to share with you the story of how common sense happened to come into being, including the terrible moment that changed everything in my life and finally made me sit down and start writing. Let me start at the beginning. I come from an anxious family, but I was always able to sort of white knuckle my way through life. I was okay, but not really. Maybe you can identify. I was doing all right until I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And then I was overwhelmed with fear and worry. Cancer is such a dark place to be. If you've been there, you know what I'm talking about. I was starting to face 6 months of chemotherapy and not sure how I was going to make it through when a friend suggested I read a book on anxiety. I read it and loved it. And then another friend suggested a different book, and I read that. And I started reading everything I could get my hands on about anxiety. I was so excited to find out I wasn't the only anxious person on this planet, and neither are you. There are lots of us anxious people, and some of us have found wonderful ways to heal and deal with anxiety. And as I read, I started trying out some of the things the authors were suggesting. I started putting them into practice in my own life. And over time, I think I've tried everything. Now, some things worked really well for me, like practicing gratitude works for me, visualization, journaling, and some things were complete duds. As I say, you have to kiss a lot of frogs before you get to your prince. And I'll share with you, for me, meditation has never worked. I just can't seem to stop thinking. My meditation practice goes something like this. Breathe in, my nose itches. Breathe out. Did I remember to close the window upstairs? I'm not sure, and I think it's going to rain. Breathe in, and if it rains this afternoon, I really need to go to the store and get onions. Breathe out. I wonder how long I have to sit here. This is going nowhere. That is sort of the way my meditation has always looked. I've tried different kinds. For me, meditation isn't the answer. But here's the thing. I know it works for all sorts of people who swear by it. And so I recommend it. I suggest you go ahead and try it. Just because it doesn't work for me doesn't mean it won't work for you. We are all so different. I think of this book and my work as offering sort of a smorgasbord of anxiety-busting tools and techniques. You get to come to the table, take what you want, and leave the rest. Some of them are going to work for you, and some of them aren't. The trick is just to keep working and trying until you find the right combination. and we can go on that journey together. Anyway, I kept reading about anxiety, and in time, I went back to graduate school to continue to read about anxiety and study counseling psychology. Right before I graduated, I was honored to be asked to join a small private practice. And I'll tell you, I felt like I was living the life I had always dreamed of living. I was helping people with their anxiety. I was dealing well with my own. I graduated on Saturday. On Monday evening at 7:30 exactly, my doctor had called to tell me that I had leukemia, cancer again. But it was different this time. This time, I had this wonderful tool chest of things I could do to help me feel better. And along with traditional medical treatment, I used most of the tools that I had at my disposal to get me through. I tried acupuncture. I went to a nutritionist, a therapist. I embraced tapping or EFT and reframing, and you name it, I went for it. And this time, dealing with cancer was easier. I had so many answers to help me feel better. I thought, wouldn't it be wonderful to have all these answers together in one place? Kind of like a reference where I could just look up something when I felt anxious and maybe find some instant relief. And so I went looking for a book that had these simple, easy suggestions and tools to manage anxiety, all together in one place. I knew exactly what I was looking for. I wanted a book I could keep beside my bed so I could get support in the middle of the night, or I could download and carry it with me through the day. Maybe you've looked for something similar. I kept thinking to myself, wouldn't it be nice to have a resource I could turn to anytime, day or night, like a trusted coach or a friend I could call on 24/7? How about you? Have you been looking for something like that? I get it. I looked everywhere, but I just couldn't find what I wanted. So I hoped that somebody would write that book and it would just one day magically show up on Amazon or at Barnes and Noble. It certainly didn't occur to me that it was something I would ever write until the shocking realization that changed everything. And here's the story of how my life changed in an instant. As I mentioned, my entire family was anxious, including my mom. And when my mom was in her 60s, she went through a really tough time. It was a real tough time. And eventually she went to her doctor for help with her absolutely overwhelming anxiety. The doctor prescribed alprazolam, and my mother took it and immediately felt better. I just remember how happy she was to have found what was described to her as a non-addicting, safe pill she could take indefinitely. We both noticed the change in her right away. She was better, she felt better, she functioned better, and we had found the answer. I was so happy I didn't think to ask questions. She was better, and I was glad. Now, fast forward 20 years. My mom is now in her 80s, and she's still taking 4 doses of alprazolam every day. God forbid she miss a dose. She talked to a therapist twice a year and had her prescription renewed regularly. Then, out of the blue, a nurse practitioner said to her, "You're going to have to get off your alprazolam. We're not going to prescribe it anymore to people over 60. It's just too dangerous." My mom was in her 80s, but anyway, the nurse told her to skip her noontime pill every day for a week. So my mom went home and didn't take her noontime pill. An hour or two later, she called to tell me she was shaking uncontrollably and felt like she was going to kill herself. I cannot tell you how I felt as I held the phone in one hand, telling my mom it was going to be okay, and was typing alprazolam into my computer with the other hand. I remember the panic at hearing her words and the sickness in my stomach as I read on the screen that alprazolam was another name for Xanax. My mom had been taking Xanax for 20 years, and no one had ever said anything about it. No one had told her that alprazolam is highly addictive, and withdrawal is similar from withdrawing from alcohol. And in my professional experience, it's actually worse. When I started calling her healthcare professionals, no one was interested in helping her find a way to withdraw. It's really easy to write a prescription. It's really hard to help someone find their way back. There was no offer for rehab, no suggestion of a plan to get her off drugs, just the grudging willingness to continue to prescribe. Anyway, as I held that phone and read on the screen and realized that my mother was a drug addict, I knew things were going to have to change. This was inexcusable. And especially because I knew from personal and professional experience, there were so many things she could have done to help ease her anxiety before she tried the medication, if someone had just offered her a choice. And she's not alone. Women are twice as likely to be diagnosed with anxiety, and we're much more likely to be prescribed medication for our anxiety. Now, I know healthcare providers don't have a lot of time to spend with each client. I get it. But what if they had a book to hand to their anxious clients, and while they were saying, here, try some of these ideas first. Come back in 3 months. If it doesn't work, we'll talk about medication at that point. Now, this may not be right for everyone, but for some people, it could be the answer. You know, when you go to your healthcare provider, they say, oh, you have high blood pressure, high blood sugar, diabetes, whatever. And there's a pill you can take for it. And if you're seriously ill, of course, the pill is the answer. And as always, if you and your prescriber decide medication is the answer for you, take it. I'm not opposed to medication for anything. I've seen it literally save lives. But, you know, if your blood pressure isn't that high, or if your anxiety is not too overwhelming, maybe the answer could be a lifestyle change, a breathing technique. Why not try that first? Because those things show up without the downside of side effects or the cost of medication. You know, I kept thinking, that's what my mom needed, a choice. That's what we all need, a choice. None of us should have to go through what my mom did. And that is why I sat down and started writing. I also wanted to write a book for women. Why? Because when I looked around at what was available, I couldn't find a single book written by a woman for women everywhere on anxiety. Not a single book. And why does that matter? Well, as I said, we're twice as likely to be diagnosed with anxiety, much more likely to be put on medication. We are more likely to be diagnosed with every single one of the anxiety disorders except social anxiety. And when anxiety shows up in our lives, it is much more likely to disable us, to make our lives miserable. But I couldn't find a single book for us. If I asked you, who's diagnosed more with post-traumatic stress disorder, men or women, what would you guess? If you said men, that's what I thought too. But the truth is, women are much more likely to be diagnosed with PTSD. Why? Because we're at much greater risk for domestic violence and sexual abuse. Get this. Half of women everywhere experience trauma in our lives. Half of us, 1 out of 2. 1 in 4 of us have faced an attempted or a completed sexual assault. 1 in 3 of us report abuse by a domestic partner. Line up 3 women, 1 out of 3. And this violence doesn't just cause post-traumatic stress disorder in the trauma victims. Just the fear of that makes women more anxious. But I couldn't find a single book by a woman for anxious women. Talk about a need. Talk about a calling. I knew that this was my mission and my passion to do the research, to pull together as much information as I could find about women and anxiety, put them together in a book, and that book would be a resource and a companion and a way through anxiety for women everywhere. So I wrote this book for my mom. I wrote this book for me, and I wrote this book for you. This is a book for all of us. If you're interested in making sure you get your copy of Common Sense, please get on the waiting list at wendyleeds.com/coming soon. We can let you know the minute the book comes out. And of course, we'll put that link in our show notes. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe. And until we're together again, I wish you peace, joy, and love.